The fluorescent lights in the ER were still buzzing above me when I reached for my phone at 1:58 in the morning and saw the picture that finally made everything in my life line up in the ugliest way. My younger sister, Kendra, was stretched across the couch in my living room, smiling into her camera with a glass of red wine in her hand, like peace was something she had earned. The caption said, "First quiet night in this house in weeks." My mother had left a laughing reaction under it, and by then the hospital had already called both of my parents after I collapsed mid-shift. Neither of them came. I was 36 years old, an ER nurse on the night shift, a single mother to a 9-year-old girl named Elsie, and I had been working myself past the edge of exhaustion to keep a roof over people who had quietly decided my breaking point was just another inconvenience. What I did not know yet was that the post was the smallest part of it. While I was picking up extra shifts and trying to hold my life together with caffeine, overtime, and denial, my family had already been doing far more behind my back than I understood that night. And before the week was over, I would learn just how much they stood to gain if they could make me look unstable. That was the night something in me finally stopped giving them the benefit of the doubt. One nurse had called off, 2 beds in triage had turned into 5, an elderly man with chest pain had come in right behind a teenager with a busted lip, and then an asthmatic child, and then a woman who thought her numbness in her arm was nothing until it wasn't. I charted, cleaned, reassured, moved, smiled, repeated. I had been doing that for so long that most nights my body didn't feel like something I lived in, it felt like equipment I borrowed. Raina Maddox caught me at the station when I was trying to finish a chart with fingers that would not stay steady. She looked down at my hand, then up at me. "Maris, you are shaking." I flexed my fingers once and kept typing. "I'm fine." "You are not fine." She lowered her voice, but not enough to hide the edge in it. "You've been running on caffeine and duty for weeks. You look like somebody who thinks the whole world falls apart if she sits down for 10 minutes. I gave her the kind of smile women like me learn young, the one that means I heard you and I cannot afford to act like I did. In my head, I was already doing numbers. Elsie's school lunch account needed money by Friday, her allergy medicine was almost out, the electric bill had cleared last night, groceries were getting thinner by the day, and back at 218 Willow Bend Road, there were 4 adults under one roof, but somehow I was still the only one living like the roof depended on me. I made it another 20 minutes. I remember the stack of intake forms tucked against my hip. I remember the polished floor reflecting the ceiling lights in long white streaks. I remember my knees softening first, as if someone had reached behind them and quietly snipped the wires. Then the forms slid from my hand and the floor came up too fast. Somebody shouted my name. A pair of shoes squeaked hard against tile. The lights blurred into one white halo. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying in a curtained bay in the same ER where I worked, an IV taped to my arm, a blood pressure cuff squeezing me every few minutes like a reminder of what humiliation feels like when it comes dressed as concern. There's a special kind of shame in becoming the patient in a place where everyone knows your good side, your competent side, your keep-it-moving side. I stared at the rail of the bed and tried not to think about how many people had seen me go down. A nurse from nights checked on me, adjusted the line, and told me they had called my emergency contacts twice. My mother first, then my father. No answer from either. She gave me that small, careful look people use when they don't want to say more than they already have. A little before 2, when the hallway had gone quieter, except for the soft slap of rubber soles and the beeping of monitors, I looked at my phone again. The post was still there. Kendra on my couch, the wine glass, my mother's laughing reaction, Denise Vale writing, "Enjoy it while it lasts, honey." I stared at the screen until it dimmed in my hand. That post hurt, but what hurt more was how familiar it felt. This was not a new cruelty, it was just the latest one with better lighting. When I had asked Kendra last spring if she had any plan at all for moving out, she rolled her eyes and told me I made everything feel heavier than it needed to be. When I told my mother I couldn't keep covering every bill in the house forever, she sighed like I had ruined a nice dinner and said I did not have to turn everything into a war. When I came home too tired to eat after a double shift and sat at the kitchen table with my head in my hands, my father had stood in the doorway and said I needed to stop acting like every hard day was a national emergency. They did not always use the word dramatic. They didn't have to. The meaning was always there. I was the one who overreacted. I was the one who made things tense. I was the reason the air in the house felt bad. Never the unpaid bills, never the freeloading, never the woman working herself into the ground while everyone else treated her labor like background noise. They discharged me at dawn. I drove home with the window cracked, cold October air cutting through the smell of hospital tape and stale sweat. Bell Meadow looked washed out that early, the sky a flat gray silver, yards wet with dew, gas station signs still glowing, an inflatable pumpkin flopped sideways on someone's lawn. The whole town felt like it was holding its breath. I felt like I was the only one in it. When I walked through the front door of 218 Willow Bend Road, the house already sounded like it belonged to everyone but me. Lowell was in his recliner watching the local morning news. He glanced over once and said, "You look fine to me." Denise stood at the counter making coffee. She did not turn around. "There's fresh if you want some." Kendra was wrapped in a blanket in the armchair, wearing my old college hoodie, scrolling her phone with the swollen self-importance of someone who has never paid a mortgage in her life. No one asked if I was okay. No one apologized for not picking up. No one asked whether Elsie had been alone, or scared, or confused. Then I heard feet on the stairs, and my daughter came flying down in mismatched socks, her backpack half-zipped, hair still sleep-bent on one side. "Mom!" She threw herself into me hard enough to make my ribs ache. I held her anyway. "Grandma said you just got yourself too worked up again. Are you okay?" That was the moment it really hit. Not the IV, not Kendra's post, not even my parents ignoring the hospital. It was hearing my daughter repeat their version of me back to me, like it was fact. I kissed the top of her head and told her I was okay. Then I helped her find her lunchbox, and while I was standing in the kitchen digging for apple slices and a juice pouch, I saw a white envelope on the table. Ashe County Probate Court. It was addressed to Lowell Vale. I did not touch it. I just looked. Elsie was pulling on her jacket when she said, almost absently, "Grandpa said maybe soon you won't have to worry about this house stuff anymore because somebody responsible is going to handle it." I went still with the lunchbox in my hand. "What house stuff, baby?" She shrugged. "I don't know, just house stuff." The bus came 5 minutes later. I watched her climb on, watched the doors fold shut behind her, watched it pull away from the curb in a hiss of diesel and brake dust. Then I went back into the kitchen. The envelope was still there, beside my mother's coffee mug and the electric bill I had paid the night before. The house was quiet in that ugly morning way, not peaceful, just full of people who had already decided what role I was supposed to play in it. I stood there looking at that court envelope and understood something for the first time. Whatever was happening in my house had already started, and in that moment, the only person who seemed not to know the whole story was me. The following morning, my phone rang while I was sitting in my car outside Bell Meadow Elementary, watching Elsie disappear through the front doors with her purple backpack bouncing against her shoulders. I almost let the call go to voicemail. My hands still felt off. Not shaky exactly, just not fully mine yet. "This is Joanne Wister from billing at St. Matthew Regional. Do you have a minute?" I looked through the windshield at the line of parents pulling away from the curb. "Sure. I'm calling about your ER visit from yesterday. We're verifying insurance and payment information, and something odd came up when the system ran a standard financial check." "What kind of odd?" A pause. Joanne lowered her voice, the way people do when they know they're stepping 1 inch beyond what their job technically requires. I can't advise you on anything official, but if I were you, I'd pull my credit report today, just to be safe. My stomach tightened. Why? There are some account indicators attached to your file that don't match what we usually see. It could be nothing, it could be old debt, but it might be worth looking at. When the call ended, I didn't drive home. I turned right out of the school lane, past the gas station on Main, and pulled into the back corner of the McDonald's lot near the hospital, where no one from my house would see me. I opened my laptop on the steering wheel and logged in. The credit score hit first. I stared at it, blinking like the number might rearrange itself into something that belonged to me. It didn't. Then came the accounts. 3 credit cards I had never opened, and a small personal loan I knew nothing about. 2 were badly past due, 1 was already in collections. The balances sat there in black and white like they had always belonged to my life, like they had always been mine to carry. $38,642. I made a sound I didn't recognize, something between a laugh and a choke. I called the fraud number listed beside one of the cards and got transferred twice before a man named Noah Mercer picked up. His voice was calm in the practiced way of someone who deals with panic for a living. I verified my name, date of birth, the last 4 of my social, and then he started reading back details tied to the applications: my address, my cell number from 2 years ago, the name of the street I'd grown up on, the community college where I took prerequisites for nursing school. These were completed through online applications, he said. Whoever did it had enough information to pass the identity checks. My fingers tightened around the phone. Enough information how? They answered relationship and address-based questions correctly. Sometimes that means a data breach. Sometimes it means the person was familiar with the applicant. Familiar. He didn't have to say it. The word landed anyway. Noah sent me a summary for dispute purposes. I opened the email the second it came through. Buried in one of the contact histories was an old backup email account I had used years ago for coupon apps and pharmacy reminders. An account Kendra had once used to print concert tickets when her own email was locked. There were also little things, stupid little things like the way one application shortened my middle name exactly the way my father did whenever he filled out forms by hand. It wasn't proof a stranger could never have known, but it was enough to make my skin go cold. I called Corinne Hale before I could talk myself out of it. She answered on the second ring. Maris? I think my father opened credit cards in my name. She was silent for half a beat. Take screenshots of everything. Do not confront anybody with specifics yet. Check anything tied to Elsie right now, and bring whatever you have to my office first thing tomorrow. What if I'm wrong? Then we'll find that out. But if you're right, you do not want them knowing how much you know. That night, after dinner and homework and bath time, and the kind of normal bedtime routine that feels surreal when your life is tipping sideways, I waited until Elsie was asleep and went to my bedroom closet. The metal lockbox was on the top shelf where I always kept it. The lock was still latched. That almost made me feel stupid for a second. Then I opened it. The folders weren't right. It sounds ridiculous now how small that difference was, but when you're the one who handles every school form, every insurance card, every copy of every birth certificate, you know how paper sits. Elsie's folder had been pushed back in too fast. The photocopy of her birth certificate had a fresh crease across one corner. Her social security card was still there, but upside down inside the sleeve. Somebody had taken it out and put it back without understanding that I would notice. I sat on the edge of my bed with that folder in my lap and called Corinne again. There's activity tied to her information, I said. Not a full account I can see yet, but something was checked. Somebody used her number, or tried to. Corinne didn't gasp. She didn't curse. Her voice got quieter, which was somehow worse. Bring that too. And Corinne, from this point on, assume they'll go as far as you're afraid they will. The next morning, I drove to Columbus after dropping Elsie at school. Corinne's office was on the fourth floor of a brick building across from the courthouse annex. All glass walls and muted carpet, and people who looked like their coffee never went cold. She spread my printouts across the conference table and read them without speaking. Then she looked up. "This is familial identity theft." Hearing it out loud stripped the last bit of denial out of me. I told her about the envelope from Ashe County Probate Court. She turned to her computer, searched the county filings, and went still in a way lawyers probably don't do unless something is very bad. "Maris?" She angled the screen toward me. There it was. Petition for temporary guardianship over financial affairs, filed under my name. Petitioner, Lowell Vale. Supporting statement, Kendra Vale. The stated reasoning made my mouth go dry. Episodes of physical collapse, chronic instability, inability to manage financial obligations consistently. They had turned my body giving out into an argument that I no longer had the right to run my own life. What happens if this moves forward? Corinne folded her hands. If a judge found grounds to grant it, your father could ask for authority over your financial matters, accounts, obligations, property decisions. He'd have a legal pathway to interfere with the house and anything tied to your ability to support Elsie. I stared at the filing until the words blurred. When I got home that afternoon, Lowell was at the kitchen sink rinsing his coffee mug. Denise was wiping down the counter. Kendra sat on the stool scrolling through her phone with her face turned away from me. I set my keys down carefully. "Dad, have you ever used my information for anything financial?" He didn't turn right away. Then he looked over his shoulder with that expression I hated since I was 15, the one that said I was exhausting him on purpose. What kind of question is that? A straightforward one. "No." He dried the mug and set it down. "You need to stop working yourself into these states over every little thing." Denise stepped in before I could answer. "Please don't do this tonight." "Do what?" She pressed her lips together. "Make everything worse." Kendra kept staring at her phone. I looked at all three of them, then walked toward the stairs before I did something stupid like start begging for honesty from people who had already decided I didn't deserve it. I was halfway up when Lowell's voice drifted out from the kitchen, low and urgent, meant for Denise and not for me. "She's pulling records now. We need to get ahead of this before Sunday." I stopped with one hand on the banister, every nerve in my body suddenly awake. That night, I sat beside Elsie's bed after she fell asleep, the glow from her nightlight catching on the papers in my lap. My credit report, Noah Mercer's email, Corinne's notes on the petition for temporary guardianship over financial affairs. I wasn't wondering anymore whether I was overtired, oversensitive, or imagining things. Whatever was happening under my roof was no longer a suspicion. It was a plan. By Thursday morning, I had stopped hoping any part of this would turn out to be a misunderstanding. Corinne sent me a list that was only 6 items long, but every line on it felt like another lock sliding into place around the life I thought I still had. Fraud reports, police report, medical letter, property deed, proof of residency, written notices if necessary. I read it in the parking lot outside Ashford Police Department, with my engine still running and the heat blowing too hard on my knees. The building looked exactly like every small-town police station I had ever driven past without really seeing. Brick front, 2 faded flags, 1 bench by the entrance, a cruiser parked crooked near the curb. I sat there for a full minute before I turned the key and went inside. Officer Pilar Shaw took me in a small interview room that smelled faintly like paper and old coffee. She had a steady face, mid-40s maybe, no wasted sympathy in it and no impatience either. I laid everything out in front of her. Credit reports, Noah Mercer's email, a printout of the suspicious activity tied to Elsie's information, Corinne's notes. Pilar megged quietly, Her eyes moved once from the papers to me, then back down. These accounts were opened online. That's what the issuer said. And your daughter is 9. Yes. That was the first moment somebody with authority looked at the facts and did not act like I was the unstable one in the room. Pilar sat back in her chair. All right, we're doing this the right way. I'm filing an identity theft report for you and documenting the activity tied to your daughter's social security number. I can't promise this moves fast, but I can tell you what you're doing is exactly what you should be doing. My throat tightened so suddenly I had to swallow before I spoke. Thank you. She handed me a form and a pen. I need dates as best as you can remember, and I need names, even if you hate writing them down. I wrote Lowell Vale, Denise Vale, Kendra Vale, my own family in block letters on a police form under suspected involvement. It felt obscene, and it felt overdue. From the station, I drove straight to Dr. Avery Sloane's office. I did not have an appointment. I had a pulse in my throat, and a daughter whose future had already been dragged into adult greed. The receptionist told me Dr. Sloane could squeeze me in for 10 minutes. He came in wearing the same navy tie he always wore and sat down across from me with my chart in his hand. He had seen me twice in the past year for exhaustion-related things I kept pretending were isolated incidents. You pushed too far again, he said. I gave a tired laugh. Apparently so. He looked at me over his glasses. What do you need from me, Maris? I told him. Not everything, just the parts that mattered. My father had filed a petition that painted my collapse as evidence I could not manage my own affairs. My daughter's information had been touched. My lawyer needed medical language that said what was true. Dr. Sloane was quiet for a moment. You were dehydrated and severely overextended. You were not cognitively impaired. I know that. I need it in writing. I can do that, but I need the wording to be precise if it's going to probate court. How long? By Saturday afternoon. Saturday felt too far away and somehow not far enough. When I got back to St. Matthew that evening to pick up a spare set of scrubs I had left in my locker, Raina caught me by the time clock. She took one look at my face. You filed the report. I nodded. Family. I nodded again. She exhaled through her nose and leaned a shoulder against the wall. You don't look unstable, Maris. You look like someone everybody got used to leaning on. It should not have hit me as hard as it did, but it did, because that was exactly it. Not weak, not dramatic, not fragile, just used up. The next day, Bell Meadow started feeling smaller. At the gas station, 2 women from Grace Hollow went quiet when I stepped up behind them in line. At the pharmacy drive-thru, Denise's friend from prayer group smiled at me too carefully and asked how I was doing in a tone people use with someone they think might start crying in public. Kendra was texting. Denise was confiding. Lowell was working every room before I even knew there was a room to work. By Friday afternoon, I heard from June Halpern in the least dramatic way possible. She was outside Danner's Market loading canned soup into the trunk of her Buick when she saw me crossing the lot. Maris. I stopped. She rested one hand on the cart handle and studied me for a second. Your father's been talking to too many people all at once. That was all she said. Then she got into her car and left me standing there with a gallon of milk in one hand and my heart beating hard enough to make my jaw hurt. Kendra called that night while I was rinsing pasta for Elsie's dinner. I put her on speaker for exactly 3 seconds before taking the phone off again because I did not want my daughter hearing the performance. You need to take a breath, Kendra said. Do you not see everybody's worried about you? Everybody. Mom, Dad, Pastor Elias, people who actually care what happens to Elsie. I turned off the water. What did you sign? Silence. Then a quick swallow. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? It was only to make sure Elsie has stability if you crash again. My grip tightened on the phone so hard my knuckles ached. If I crash again. You collapsed at work, Maris. This isn't normal. What's not normal is opening credit accounts in a child's name. Her breathing changed. I heard it, just for a second. You always do this, she muttered. You take something and make it ugly. No, I see the ugly after everyone else is done calling it help. She hung up on me. Lowell left his voicemail the next morning while I was changing Elsie's sheets. Sunday, Grace Hollow. We're doing this the right way, with people who care about this family. No yelling, no threats, just that same cold certainty that had ruled the house for years. Corinne called an hour later with the part that turned the whole thing from vicious to strategic. Lowell was under collection pressure, with consumer debt already closing in on him and a personal loan nearing default. This is not panic, she said. He needs access to money he does not have, and your house is the only real asset in reach. She confirmed the deed to 218 Willow Bend Road had been in my name alone since my grandmother died in 2015. No lease, no rent history. Legally, they were there because I had allowed it. Then she started drafting written notices and reached out to Gideon Slate about a possible listing. If you do this, she said, it has to be real. By Saturday night, after Elsie fell asleep with one hand tucked under her cheek, I sat at the kitchen table under the yellow light over the stove. In front of me were the house deed, the fraud report, Corinne's draft notices, and an email from Dr. Sloan saying the signed letter was ready for pickup first thing in the morning. For years, I had told myself silence was the price of keeping the house calm. Silence had not protected me. It had not protected my daughter. All it had done was make life easier for the people feeding off both of us. I looked at the papers until they stopped feeling like papers and started feeling like the first honest thing in my house. By then, I was no longer afraid of Sunday. I was only done waiting for it. Sunday morning came bright and cold. The kind of Ohio cold that made the church parking lot shine under a thin film of frost and turned every breath into something visible. Grace Hollow Fellowship looked exactly the way it always did after service. Folding tables lined with store-bought cookies, coffee in silver urns, paper cups stacked beside cheap plastic stirrers, children weaving between adults who stayed to talk longer than they meant to. It was that ordinary, and that was what made it dangerous. Lowell had not chosen a courtroom. He had chosen a room full of people who had watched me grow up, watched my grandmother's funeral, brought casseroles when Elsie had strep, and thought they knew the shape of my life. He had spent the week laying track. I felt that the second Elsie and I stepped inside the fellowship hall. Conversations thinned, not stopped, just thinned enough for me to hear them die. A few people gave me those careful faces, the ones that say they have already been told I am fragile. Denise sat near the coffee table with a tissue folded in one hand. Kendra stood a little behind her in a cream sweater and boots she definitely did not pay for herself. Lowell stayed by Pastor Elias Wren with one hand on the back of a chair, looking exactly like the weary father of a difficult daughter. Corinne had come with me, but hung back near the wall, dark coat still on, legal pad tucked under arm. She was there to be seen more than heard. I kept Elsie close at my side. Lowell cleared his throat. Thank you all for staying. We know this is unusual, but we're dealing with something serious in our family. He looked at me, then away from me, like even making eye contact cost him. Maris has been under a lot of pressure. You all know she collapsed at the hospital this week. She's exhausted, she's overwhelmed, and lately she's been making decisions that could hurt herself and Elsie if we don't intervene. A few heads nodded. Denise pressed the tissue to her mouth and let out a shaky breath. We just want her safe. Kendra crossed her arms. Nobody wants this to be public. We tried to handle it privately." That almost made me laugh. Lowell went on. "She's angry. She's suspicious of everyone trying to help. She's talking about drastic changes with the house, with Elsie, with everything. We're afraid she's not thinking clearly." Thinking clearly. I stood there in my navy cardigan and jeans, my daughter leaning against my side, and listened to my father use my own exhaustion like a rope to tie around my throat. Pastor Elias finally looked at me. "Maris, would you like to say something?" "Yes." Just that. Yes. I walked to the long table near the coffee urns and set my folder down. The room was so quiet I could hear somebody's spoon tapping the inside of a styrofoam cup. The first thing I pulled out was the deed. This house is not a family house in the way anyone here has been led to believe. It is my house. My grandmother left 218 Willowband Road to me in 2015, and it has been in my name alone ever since. I laid the deed flat on the table. Lowell moved immediately. That's not the point. It is exactly the point. I did not raise my voice. I didn't need to. The paper was doing the work for me. My father, my mother, and my sister have lived in my house for years because I let them. They are not on the deed. They do not pay the mortgage because there is no mortgage. They do not pay rent. They live there because I believed family meant opening the door. The room shifted a little, not toward me yet, just away from him. Then I took out the credit reports. Over the last 2.5 years, multiple accounts were opened using my social security number, my address, and identifying information only someone close to me would know. I did not open those accounts. I did not authorize those accounts. I have already filed fraud reports and a police report. Lowell gave a short, bitter laugh. "You don't know what you're talking about." I turned one of the pages so the account history faced the room. "I know exactly what I'm talking about." He stepped forward, but Pastor Elias lifted one hand without even fully looking at him, a small movement that stopped him cold. I set down the next paper more carefully than the rest. "There has also been financial activity linked to my daughter's information." A woman near the back let out a tiny sound. "Not mine, Elsie's, my 9-year-old daughter." The silence that followed was different from the one before. Before, it had been curiosity. Now it was recoil. June Halpern was the first one to speak. A child. Just those 2 words, but they landed like a hammer. Denise's face changed, not into guilt, into fear. Fear that the room had stopped seeing her as the suffering mother in this story. Kendra pushed off the wall. "You're twisting this. Nobody did anything to Elsie." Then why was her paperwork moved? Why is there activity tied to her social security number? She opened her mouth and then closed it. I took out the last stack. And since that still wasn't enough, my father filed a petition for temporary guardianship over financial affairs, naming me as someone too unstable to manage my own life. I handed the copy to Pastor Elias. He read the first page and his whole expression hardened. "The petitioner is Lowell Vale," I said. "The supporting statement is signed by Kendra Vale." Kendra's face went red. It wasn't like that. I looked at her for the first time since I had started speaking. What part wasn't like that? The part where you told the court I couldn't handle my finances, or the part where you helped him build a paper trail out of my collapse? She took a step back. Lowell finally lost the tone he had been working so hard to keep. "We were trying to protect you." "No, you were trying to get control of what belongs to me." Corinne stepped forward then, not enough to take over, just enough to place one typed summary beside the rest. "My father has active collection pressure against him. Enough debt that access to my finances and my property would solve a very real problem for him. That petition was not concern. It was a strategy. Concern doesn't file papers in secret." June said it without heat, which somehow made it worse. Nobody answered her. I took the last 3 envelopes from the folder and set them down one by one in front of Lowell, Denise, and Kendra. "These are written notices. You are all being formally notified that your permission to live at 218 Willow Bend Road is ending. I have already started the process of putting the house on the market with Gideon Slate." Denise made a broken sound. "You can't do this to us." I looked at her and thought about the hospital bed, the laughing reaction, Elsie repeating their version of me back into my face. "You did this to yourselves." Lowell stared at the envelope as if not touching it could somehow keep it from existing. Kendra's chin trembled, then hardened into anger. "This is insane." "No, this is documented." Pastor Elias set the petition copy down slowly. "Lowell, did you file this without telling your daughter?" Lowell said nothing. "Did you involve me under false pretenses?" Still nothing. The room had finished changing by then. People were no longer watching me to see if I would unravel. They were watching him to see how much smaller he could get. I closed the folder. That's everything I have to say. Nobody tried to stop me when I took Elsie's hand and walked out of the fellowship hall. The cold outside hit my face clean and sharp. Gravel crunched under our shoes as we crossed the lot. Halfway to the car, Elsie looked up at me. "Do Grandpa and Grandma and Aunt Kendra hate you?" I opened the passenger door for her and knelt just long enough to fix the sleeve of her coat. "Sometimes grown-ups hate the truth before they accept it. That doesn't make the truth wrong." She studied my face for a second, then climbed into her seat. I closed the door gently, stood there with my hand on the roof of the car, and let one long breath leave my body. For the first time all week, I wasn't bracing for what they might do next. I was listening to the silence after they had run out of places to hide. The phone started while we didn't even make it home. Lowell called once while I was buckling Elsie into her booster, again while I was turning onto Willow Bend, and twice more before I got her inside and fed. I let them all go to voicemail at first. When I finally listened, each message sounded like a different man trying on the same panic. In the first one, he was pure threat. "You are making a mistake you won't be able to take back." In the second, his voice turned pleading, almost fatherly. "Maris, don't do this. Don't blow up what's left of this family over one bad week." By the third, he had settled into the version of himself I knew best, the one who could turn accusation into wounded disappointment. "After everything your mother and I have done for you, this is how you repay us?" Denise left two of her own. In one, she cried so hard she could barely get my name out. In the other, her voice had gone flat with humiliation. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone I have to see every week." Kendra did not call. She deleted the post before dinner. But Bell Meadow was too small and too bored for that to matter. By Monday morning, 3 different people had already sent me screenshots like they were passing evidence in a trial that had finally become public. Corinne called just after lunch. "The court is not moving forward on your father's petition," she said. "Dr. Sloan's letter helped. So did the fraud documentation and the police report. There are too many holes in what he filed." I sat in my car outside Bell Meadow Elementary, hands wrapped around a coffee I had forgotten to drink. "So it's over?" "That petition is, yes. The rest isn't over, but he lost the leverage he thought he had." Later that week, Officer Pilar Shaw called to confirm the identity theft investigation was active and that the child-related activity made the whole situation more serious, not less. She did not promise me justice in a neat package. I trusted her more for that. She just said the facts were ugly and they would be treated that way. Bell Meadow shifted slowly, then all at once. Denise still went to prayer group on Wednesday. I know because June Halpern told me later, not in a gossipy way, just with the plainness of weather. "Your mother came in, sat down, and nobody said anything unkind, but nobody moved closer either." That silence landed harder than any sermon could have. Kendra's turn came at the gym. A woman I recognized from school pickup stopped me 2 days later and said she had heard Kendra snap at a member who asked if it was true they had used a child's social security number. Kendra had stormed off to the back room and never come out again. Image was always oxygen to her. You could survive a lot in Bell Meadow, but not that kind of question in public. Lowell tried one more time in person. I came home from work on Friday and found him standing in the driveway with both hands in his jacket pockets, like if he kept them there long enough, he could stop himself from reaching for control. "You're really listing the house?" "Yes." "Where are we supposed to go?" I looked past him at the porch light I had replaced last winter, the flower bed I had weeded in spring, the front door I had unlocked every night for people who never once acted like I was doing them a favor. "That's the first time you've asked that question," I told him. "I've been answering it alone for years." He had no reply to that, just a stare full of shock that I had finally stopped filling in the blanks for him. They were gone before the notices ran out, not because they understood, not because they were sorry, because for the first time in years they had no advantage left. Denise and Lowell moved into a one-bedroom rental in Newark. Kendra went to stay with a friend in Dublin, at least until that arrangement wore thin the way all her arrangements eventually did. I wasn't there to watch them leave. That mattered to me more than I expected. I did not want the moment of their exit to become one more performance in a story already swollen with performances. I was at work. Then I picked up Elsie from school. Then I drove home and opened the front door to silence. Real silence this time. No television already running, no coffee mug abandoned in the sink that I would be expected to rinse, no tension in the walls waiting to tell me I was the reason the air felt bad. Just the dull, hollow quiet of an emptied-out house. Elsie walked into the living room and turned in a slow circle. It sounds different. It does. We stood there together, and what I felt was not joy. It was weight leaving bone. Gideon Slate listed the property the following week. A young couple from Dayton made the cleanest offer. We closed 6 weeks later. After fees, commissions, legal costs, and the ordinary dull cuts that come with selling a house, I had enough to do what I should have done long before things got this bad. Start over somewhere smaller and safer. Elsie and I moved to a 2-bedroom apartment in Westerville, north of Columbus, close enough to a new hospital that I could transfer, and far enough from Bell Meadow that every trip to the grocery store no longer felt like a referendum on my life. The apartment was plain: beige carpet, narrow kitchen, a balcony barely big enough for 2 chairs and a potted plant. It was also the first place I had lived in years where nobody treated my peace like a resource they were entitled to spend. I locked down Elsie's documents, replaced what needed replacing, set up protections with help from people who actually knew what they were doing, and opened a college savings account in her name that no one would ever touch but me. Not because money fixes betrayal, because motherhood, real motherhood, means closing the doors people used to walk through. Corinne called one evening to tell me Lowell had accepted a resolution that spared everyone a long public process, but still left a mark that would follow him. He was required to make restitution. The case left him with a formal record tied to financial misconduct, and between that and the debt already hanging over him, any chance of walking into decent work without questions was gone. It was not prison, and it was not ruin in the dramatic way people imagined. It was something quieter and more permanent. It was all there on paper now, plain enough that nobody could call it a misunderstanding. Denise stayed with him. That did not surprise me. Some people would rather live inside the wreckage they recognize than step into the truth that would ask something of them. Kendra texted once, 3 weeks after the move. "I hope this was worth it." I looked at it for a long time before deleting it. Even then, she still thought the story was about her loss, not what she had helped destroy. Happiness was never the point. Safety was. Space was. An end to being eaten alive in my own home was. A few days after that, I got a card in the mail, no return address. Inside, in neat blue ink, June Halpern had written only one sentence: Your grandmother would have known the difference between cruelty and self-rescue. I kept that card. At the new hospital, Raina came to visit on a Friday I had off and stood in my kitchen with a takeout coffee in one hand and a grin in the other. "You still look tired," she said, "but you no longer look like you're disappearing in front of people." That was the closest thing to a miracle I got. Not glowing skin, not a brand new dream life, not some dramatic reinvention, just the absence of being consumed. One night in late November, I came out of the shower and found Elsie at the little table by the window, with crayons spread around her and a sheet of printer paper taped down so it wouldn't move. She held up the drawing when she saw me. It was our apartment, the tiny balcony, a yellow square of a window with sunlight in it, two people standing side by side, a cat we did not own, three green plants we did, because I had finally let myself buy things that only needed light and water and not endless emotional labor. I sat down beside her and looked at the picture until my eyes burned. "Home," she said. "Yes, baby, home." That night, after I tucked her in and listened to the ordinary sounds of her brushing her teeth and humming some half-remembered song from school, I locked the apartment door and set my keys down on the kitchen counter. For the first time in years, I did not stand there wondering what would be taken from me next. Not my paycheck, not my energy, not my credibility, not my daughter's future. There is a difference between revenge and relief. I know that now. People imagine revenge as something loud. Relief is quieter than that. It is a locked door. It is a small kitchen with no one waiting to guilt you in it. It is a child drawing the place where she finally feels safe. If you have ever had to choose between keeping the peace and saving yourself, then you already know how hard that choice can be. If this story stayed with you, tell me in the comments what boundary changed your life, or what boundary you wish you had set sooner. And if you want more stories about women who stop apologizing for protecting what matters, stay with me for the next one.